This is the world according to Jen and Carolyn.
Hey everybody.
What's up, Jen?
We're back after a
Jesus Christ.
lengthy absence because one of us had to come home from New Orleans with COVID, and the lucky recipient of that illness was Carolyn.
I am the weakest link.
I swear it was that woman on the plane.
You wore a mask. You were smart.
Well, across the aisle from me, folks, was this woman who, she was wearing a mask, but she was taking it off periodically, and she was sneezing, and she looked real, like, sick and lethargic. I'm like, this bitch don't look right. So I immediately put on a mask for the duration of our flight home, and I swear she was the patient zero.
Seriously.
But who knows? We did lots of things in New Orleans where we were in very close contact with other people.
Nothing
dancing.
immoral, nothing illegal.
Nope. Dancing, karaoke, drinking, cemeteries.
It was fun.
It was the best.
I had a great time.
Worth the COVID?
Hell fucking yeah.
Awesome.
Actually.
I'm glad to hear it. And speaking of, well, not so much debauchery, but debatable, tonight we're going to be talking about the oldest profession in the world, which
Bartending?
Nope. Close. Sex work. The two kind of go hand in hand. It's often referred to as the oldest profession in the world because it's been around for a long time. And because women for so long didn't have a viable means to make money, except with what they were born with. So I totally get that. So we're going to be discussing the origin of earning money through sex work, as well as the dangers that many sex workers face. We're also going to be discussing arguments for and against legalizing sex work in the U.S. And for purposes of this episode, we're going to be focusing exclusively on voluntary sex work and survival sex work rather than involuntary sex work and or sex trafficking. Okay, we know it exists, but we're going to be talking primarily or almost exclusively about folks who are doing this work voluntarily. All right, so here we go. Are you ready?
I'm ready. I'm excited.
So let's start with a history.
Oh, God.
This is a history lesson courtesy of procon.org. So you put this in here, right?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, tell me more about this.
I love what's it called? Linguistics and like this etymology. I'm like edamame.
It's not entomology is bugs, etymology is language.
Yeah, the language. Yeah, I'm not into the bugs. Well, I thought that was interesting that it's a mid-16th century verb, Latin prostitute, exposed publicly, offered for sale, from the verb prostutere. And I don't know, I just think it's funny as you start with kind of the words have power.
Yeah.
Like I say that quite often in my work. And I think a topic like this, I invite you all to get really curious in your mind for a moment and think of any slang terms, any images, maybe your own values around sex work or quote unquote prostitution. Where they come from. And I'm really curious if by the end of this episode, if you may have expanded or shifted your consciousness about this topic. Because I think people have a lot of really strong opinions and we don't often know why.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah, our puritanical values often like set up these things are ingrained in us and we don't necessarily know why.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and you threw this at me today, which is going to be fucking hilarious.
Yeah, why don't you read the timeline? Here, it's a long timeline, so I won't make you read it all. Why don't you read through 1919, through Russia? Give it to me. Yes.
So 1780 BC, I'm going to butcher these
Hammurabi.
names. You are so good at this. 6 codes of Hammurabi's 282 codes specifically mention the rights of a prostitute or a child of a prostitute.
Cool.
So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
1600 BC, legal brothels in China. According to Chinese traditions, commercial brothels were started in the 7th century BC by the statesman's philosopher Huang Chung, and basically helped increase the state's income.
That's nice.
594 BC, legal brothels in ancient Greece. The celebrated Athenian lawmaker and lyric poet Solon founded state brothels and taxed prostitutes on their earnings. So trying to make some money off these women.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Right on. Late 500s, Visigoths criminalized prostitution. A decree of Ricard, Catholic king of the Visigoths of Spain, leave it to the Catholics.
Right.
Absolutely prohibited prostitution.
I just like saying Visigoths.
Visigoths. I remember that from high school history, right?
Goth in it.
1158, Holy Roman Army punishes prostitution. And in 1158, Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa punished prostitutes. You know, Barbarossa was probably getting something.
Oh, yeah, without doubt.
No prostitutes travel with the army. That's fucked up. And when caught in the act, the prostitute was ordered to have her nose cut off in an attempt to make her less attractive. That's even more cut off. Why don't we cut off the dude's dick?
I know.
I don't know. A soldier caught in the act was sometimes had a finger cut off or an eye removed. All right, and I'll finish it off with 1469. Castile increases pimping punishments.
Pimping ain't easy, but it's necessary.
So an ordinance of Henry the Sixth?
Yeah, I think that's the right numeral, dude.
King of Castilia was launched against the men that engaged with it. All right, so now they're getting the dudes from Johns, who act as procurers associated themselves with cities were called ruffians.
Nice. And we'll talk more about what Sweden's doing, which is punishing Johns and helping women doing, or men doing sex work.
In Sweden.
So, I mean, yeah, but we're going to talk about the pitfalls there too. Okay. So let's move on to 1699, the relegation of prostitution in colonial America.
Ew.
Prostitution was not an offense in either English or American common law. And prior to World War I, although being a prostitute was not an offense, prostitution was generally regulated as a specific sort of vagrancy.
Because raping and pillaging was okay.
Yeah, that's always been fine.
Okay.
So here we go. 1897, New Orleans.
Woo!
Yeah, Storyville, New Orleans.
We didn't go there.
No, we didn't. First anti-prostitution ordinance was the 1857 Lorette Ordinance, which prohibited prostitution on the first floor of buildings, but was soon after declared unconstitutional.
What about the third floor?
No fucking on the first floor. But you go up to the second floor, y'all are good, dude. 1919, this is where we go to Russia. They re-educate prostitutes. I'm going to kind of breeze through some of this. So they start, its operations were conducted not against the girls, seen as unwilling victims of the czarist regime, but against capitalist created institutions itself. So this was during Lenin and Trotsky. This is during the revolution.
That makes sense.
Don't get me started because I'm a commie at heart. So 1971, this is pertinent to now, Nevada regulates prostitution. The state of Nevada began to formally regulate prostitution, giving rural counties the option to license brothels. 1973, Coyote forms Coyote. Coyote is the name of the group. It's Call Off Your Old Tired Ethics. It's an acronym.
Like
the first prostitutes' rights group in the United States. It was actually formed in San Francisco.
Right on.
Sweet. 1985, World Whore Congress. Hell yeah. It was a first international meeting of prostitutes' rights. Then we had 2000, the Netherlands legalizes brothels. Brothels were illegal until October of 2000 and then became legal subsequently. November 2004, U.S. communities vote for and against legal prostitution. On November 2nd, 2004, the city of Berkeley, California voted 63.51% against decriminalizing prostitution. I think it's a white savior thing. We'll talk about that too. This notion that, prostitution brings trafficking and folks can't necessarily divorce the two. And we'll talk more about how there is a connection between the two, but there doesn't have to be. Now I think I'm generalizing and stereotyping the people of Berkeley. But so pop quiz, Carolyn, how many states in the U.S. legally allow prostitution?
Well, being that my first show was watching The Bunny Farm on HBO, I'm going to say Nevada.
Yep.
It's Reno specifically.
The one and only Nevada. There are only 21 countries in the world where prostitution is fully legal and 63 where it is partially legal. Now, this is what I alluded to earlier. What does partially legal mean? So this is the Nordic model introduced in Sweden. As I mentioned, it makes buying sex illegal, does not prosecute the seller, the sex worker. Proponents of the Nordic model see prostitution as inherently harmful and coerced. They aim to end sex work by killing the demand for transactional sex. So why don't we talk about safety a little bit? and then I'm going to kick it over to you. So many sex workers and advocates for the legalization claim that legalizing the practice would lead to increased safety for sex workers. First, we want to briefly touch on the most heinous crimes perpetrated against sex workers and also take a look at some of the overall state safety stats. So in New York, an analysis from the Sex Workers Project at the Urban Justice Center found that 80% of a small group of street sex workers who responded to a survey reported experiencing violence or threats of violence while working. And that's from USA Today.
Gosh.
So let's talk about major crimes. Now, if you are fans of the true crime genre.
That's me.
Yeah, me too. These names are likely going to sound familiar. So we have Gary Ridgway, who's more commonly known as the Green River Killer. He told detectives in the 80s he went looking for street prostitutes, many of which became his murder victims. In all, the serial killer raped and murdered more than 40 women, many of whom were prostitutes or sex workers, or young people experiencing homelessness.
Didn't they just catch him?
No, Gary Ridgway got caught some time ago. Yeah. 90s, I believe.
Okay.
Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, if you watch that documentary, it was fascinating and also incredibly sad. He murdered 13 women in England from 1975 to 1980. The majority of his victims were sex workers. You had Bryant Riviera, whom I hadn't heard of. He was arrested in California this month. I think this might have been from 2020. He's charged with femicide, killing women, in Mexico and accused of the serial killings of 3 women. At least one of the victims engaged in sex work. And then everybody knows Jack the Ripper, who murdered at least 5 women who were working as sex workers. So
that was the first serial killer I was fascinated by.
Yeah.
I did a report on him in 6th grade, and my teacher was seriously disturbed.
That's because you went to religious school, bro. I went to public school where I did my first 5th grade book report on Cujo, and it was no big deal.
I'm like, I didn't do one on Mein Kampf. Like, it's not like I'm fucking, what's that movie? Like, Jesus Christ, it's history. Come on.
God, that's crazy. But yeah, go back and listen to our Why Are Women Obsessed with True Crime, and Carolyn will tell you all about that. So the one you're thinking of who just got caught, that's Lisk.
Okay.
The Long Island serial killer, whom authorities finally, most likely, just arrested. It's definitely this motherfucker, Rex Heuermann, an architect charged with first-degree murder in connection with the deaths of 3 women whose remains were found over a decade on Long Island. It's probably more than 3, actually, from what I've seen. So, Carolyn, I'm going to kick it over to you. Can you answer the question, why are sex workers so often the target of serial killers? Like, what's going on with these dudes psychologically?
Well, there's so much literature in research literature. I can't even quote just one thing. There's so much content here. But serial killers at their core are opportunists who target marginalized and vulnerable populations.
Yep.
And sadly, historically, and even currently, sex workers are considered, quote unquote, easy prey.
Yeah.
And this is a quote because of their, quote, precarious legal status. This is the quote continued from a literature review I found. These victims are less likely to be reported missing. If you think about that, their families might be involved in illegal activity, so people aren't necessarily going to out themselves, which can cause homicides to remain unsolved, even if reported police themselves don't place marginalized victims as a priority. So, again, serial killers are, they're not stupid.
No.
They're actually, I wish they would use their intelligence for good. They're very focused, these guys. They're very particular.
Yeah.
Serial killers stalk their prey, and they make the choices in victims characteristics so they can continue murdering and avoid detection.
Yeah.
So you're not going to murder, celebrities. You're not going to murder someone who's
no one's high profile.
You want to be able to do this as long as you can. And so this is something called victim preferencing. Less attention is given to a marginalized victim. That is standard. What's the term in cop lingo? It's like no human involved.
Persona non grata.
Yeah. And so, marginalized victims such as sex workers, and also includes homeless people, drug abusers, transient, kids, homeless kids. They're not usually reported missing. If they are, it's not in a timely manner. And this makes them preferred targets for serial killers.
Yeah.
So combine that. So we have that piece alone. Then combine that with police negligence, crimes of opportunity, and, what's called the disposable other. Like you mentioned, femicide is murder of female. Adam Janis wrote a 2022 blog article for A&E. The sex worker serial murder victim isn't just a stereotype, it's a dominant demographic reality.
Yes.
And according to a recent study, 22% of confirmed U.S. serial murder victims between 1970 and 2009 were known sex workers. So that means over the last decade, 43% of victims were sex workers.
Jesus.
Considering that prostitutes make up less than 0.3% of the nation's numbers, that's kind of a big deal.
That's huge.
Like, come on, that is not considered a hate crime.
Yeah.
And so, so Eric Hinckley, a social psychologist and the author of this is an amazing book, Serial Murderers and Their Victims. Of course, I know this.
Yeah, you would. Yeah, I like that though.
So I love this book. He quotes, quote, being a prostitute increases your chances of being murdered 200 times.
Yeah.
Hinckley aggresses that the police antipathy?
Antipathy.
I guess that's the opposite of empathy. Yeah. I don't know that word.
It's just the opposite. Yeah.
Sex workers further phrase the lines of communication because sex work is illegal in most of the country. Prostitutes are far less likely than the general population to report victimization of themselves and their colleagues to the police. And I think, again, we know that sex workers just in our society in general are dehumanized. Yeah. And I even would say that, unfortunately, many sex workers might even dehumanize themselves in that and think that they deserve this or think that it's, and in the eyes of the law, in the eyes of the public, even in the eyes of the killers themselves, they're not considered human the way you and I would be considered human. And so countless evidence-based research shows that this is not just involved in the street level, but also what they call off-street sex work face disproportionate health and social inequities compared to the general population. We also know that this is a population that is again, exists with HIV, sexually transmitted infections. This, again, I don't have stats on this, but these are other reasons that this population is not going to often be seen as deserving. Yeah. But, which is just, it breaks my heart to say that. Yeah. We can't all, one of my other favorite shows, coincidentally, is Law & Order Special Victims Unit.
Hell yeah.
And, even the SVU team faces this. And, there's a human's a human.
Right. As far as we're concerned.
It doesn't matter what you do or who you are. And I also don't believe that given the opportunity, any one of us, these are circumstances. Right. I've just never been in a circumstance where I've had to do that.
Right. That's right.
But that doesn't mean it couldn't happen.
For sure. Yeah.
And so I think that, until there's so much stigmatizing that goes on and so much, again, kind of rubbernecking even that goes on where people are like, oh, this, ooh, and so, but it's also, we all have sex.
Well, it gives people an opportunity to judge too, Well,
I wouldn't do that. It's
right.
Like,
well, there's a lot of
you're just not getting paid for it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Don't act like
don't judge, bitch.
Yeah. So that, so I hope that answers your question. But again, serial killers want to keep killing. Yep. This is a population that's going to enable that.
It makes sense. And try being a sex worker of color or furthermore, a trans sex worker.
The stats are appalling.
Yeah. Yep. And it's so sad because so often folks from the LGBTQ community engage in sex work after their families have disowned them. And, we're in San Francisco where, these things happen, but being a member of the LGBTQ community, people come here for that community. But other places in the country aren't that warm and friendly. No. And so oftentimes when you're a young person struggling to survive, you're relegated to the street to do sex work. It's just so sad. Bill and I actually, just a couple of nights ago, have you ever heard the name Samuel Little?
No.
He is actually the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history. He just passed away like 2 years ago. Black guy from, I can't remember where he was from, but he preyed exclusively on homeless women, sex workers. It was frightening because the guy was a genius, certifiable genius. And he'd sit there and coldly recant. He didn't talk to anybody. And finally he made friends with this one detective whom he just happened to hit it off with. And he was telling this guy everything. And there were all these unsolved murders.
God.
Guess what this guy would do? This is fascinating. He had a photographic memory, and he was also a prolific artist. So he could draw, he could sketch his victims, and their families could identify based on the sketches. Yes, this is my missing sister, mother, cousin, etc. Frightening. But to hear him talk about exactly what we're talking about, which is I preyed on these people because I assumed they wouldn't be missed.
Right.
And that's why he got away with it for decades. He killed 200 people.
Yeah.
200 women. It's yeah. Oh God.
Oh,
anyway,
God, those numbers are people.
So let's talk about decriminalization, because one of the main arguments for the decriminalization of sex work hinges on safety. According to Human Rights Watch, this is going to, dovetail on what you were saying. Criminalizing adult, voluntary, and consensual sex, including the commercial exchange of sexual services, is incompatible with the human right to personal autonomy and privacy. In short, a government should not be telling consenting adults who they can have sexual relations with and on what terms. Human Rights Watch has consistently found in research across various countries that criminalization makes sex workers more vulnerable to violence, including rape, assault, and murder, by attackers who see sex workers as easy targets because they're stigmatized and unlikely to receive help from the police. All right, criminalization consistently undermines sex workers' ability to seek justice for crimes against them. I think you can tell where we stand just by how passionately we're talking about this. Decriminalizing sex work maximizes sex workers' legal protection and their ability to exercise other rights, including to justice and health care. Wow. So according to the ACLU, criminalization of sex work makes sex workers more vulnerable to violence on the job and less likely to report violence. So the ACLU is saying the same thing. And, further marginalized, as we said, some of society's most vulnerable groups: trans women, women of color, and immigrants. So at least 37 trans people were murdered this year for being who they are. Most were trans women of color, and many were sex workers. Okay. So places where decriminalization works for the most part. Now, this is the caveat. There are issues with every system, because anytime you have humans implementing a system, there's going to be problems. Yeah. And anytime, and I say this is somebody who works in government, anytime you got the government involved, there might be a disconnect between the people who the legislation is for and the legislators. Okay. We see this all the time. Okay. It happens. So let's talk about my favorite place on earth, Amsterdam, which I went to just a couple of months ago, where sex work is 100% legal. So
did you go to the red light?
We did. But you know what's so funny? I think I told you about this. So we went. Red light is amazing, clean, wonderful. We went to this woman-owned cocktail bar. We saw a live jazz band in the street. But before we made it to the windows where the women were selling sex, I was stoned as fuck. And I was like, I want a waffle. Let's go find a waffle. So I was guided by my stomach, so I didn't get to actually see.
Jen!
I know.
God damn it.
I know. It wasn't for lack of wanting to see it.
Are there dudes that see? Because I'm also like...
I think it's mostly women, but I'm not sure.
That bums me out.
I know.
I want male prop. I want
to see some dick in a window.
Absolutely.
Yeah, totally.
I'm so bored of seeing vaginas and boobs on HBO. I want to see some dick.
Yeah, we don't get enough dick. Although HBO does give you some dick.
That's true, but not since the days of Oz.
I'm trying to think when the last time I saw some dick on HBO. No, you saw Hodor's wiener in Game of Thrones.
I don't fucking see that.
Anyway, we're digressing big time. So we're going to talk about Amsterdam and the Dutch system, both the pros and the cons. Okay. So first, how much do sex workers in Amsterdam make? Typically, sex workers in the red light district earn between 200 and 600 euros on average an evening. So less than 200 euros a night is seen as a bad night, which happens. So there's this great quote: if you disrespect prostitutes, you disrespect all women. So they're talking about women, which is great. I'm sure there are male sex workers too, but we're going to focus on women. So there's a woman named Metje Black. I'm sure I just massacred that. She's leader of Vakbond vakwerk. Clearly, I learned nothing about Dutch when I was in Amsterdam because everybody speaks fluent English. This is the labor union for sex workers in the red light district.
They're unionized,
I know.
too. That's brilliant.
Dope. So how this works, named De Wallen, or the Walls in Dutch, for its position inside the old city walls, the red light district's medieval buildings have been a hub for sex work since the 15th century, long before the Netherlands legalized brothels and began regulating and taxing prostitution in 2000. So here's how it works. You have to have a permit. So between 2013 and 2016, all businesses active in the sex industry in Amsterdam were required to apply for a license. So to receive this license, establishments had to have an approved business plan on file that details measures for providing safe, hygienic working conditions for their sex workers. All right. So in Amsterdam, legal forms of prostitution are divided into the following categories. You've got window prostitution, private clubs, private houses, which are sex clubs without a bar, and escort agencies. So illegal prostitution is you can't work out of your house. There's a couple other caveats, massage parlors, as well as certain types of illegal escort services. So now we're going to move on to the pros. Because the job is legal and regulated, it means that prostitutes are awarded the same basic rights and responsibilities as anyone else. Health insurance, unemployment, it says invalidity benefits, but they mean like probably unemployment stuff and disability.
Okay.
They have workers' union and free access to an unlimited amount of STI checks. Sex workers have panic buttons in their brothels. Legalizing the sex trade also helped in the fight against human trafficking. They give sex workers more protection. So
it's basically oversight.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. And then the cons, sex workers often feel left out of policy conversations. So that's big. You work in government. You have to have people doing the work at the table. You can't make laws for them without them. What is it? Nothing for us without us. I can't remember. It's a common refrain in the Black Lives Matter movement. Sex workers are required to have a license under the Amsterdam Municipal Ordinance and register with the Chamber of Commerce, pay taxes, pay health insurance, etc. Yet, despite being part of the legal labor market, sex workers do not receive many business services and social security measures that are typically granted to other entrepreneurs. So it's still kind of fringy, right? And then prostitutes have to rent a window. It's extremely expensive, as you may or may not know. In Amsterdam, you pay incredibly high taxes. You get awesome shit for those taxes, but you still have to pay high taxes. So things add up quickly. So, there are arguments against decriminalization. You want to read these for us, Carolyn?
Well, so, okay. We've got 10 of them.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say this once. Legalization, decriminalization, because that repeats itself, and I'm a little bit.
You don't have to read all of these either.
So, prostitution is a gift to pimps, traffickers, and the sex industry.
Yep.
Prostitution of sex industry promotes sex trafficking. Prostitution does not control the sex industry. It expands it. Prostitution increases clandestine, hidden, illegal, and street prostitution. The sex industry increases child prostitution. The prostitution does not protect women in prostitution.
Yeah.
Increases the demand, boosts motivation for men to buy women for sex in a much wider and more permissible range of socially acceptable settings.
It's good for earning money. You don't have to read anymore. But this is from Vancouver Rape Relief and Women's Shelters. That's where these arguments against decriminalization come from. Now, when I was trying to delve into this, it gets a little murky as to whether or not there's a connection. Like some of the stuff I read said in Amsterdam, there are a lot of women coming from other countries to work who may or may not be being trafficked. It seems kind of hard to tell. I pretty much see legalizing it as a benefit because there's more protection, and I can see how that could work really well in the US. And, we don't have time to dissect each of these arguments, but so often what comes through in these arguments of opponents is that sex work is violent, exploitative, and that people who engage in sex work don't have agency. So while we willingly acknowledge that a lot of folks end up doing survival sex work because of shitty circumstances and a lack of viable alternatives, we also understand that many people willingly engage in sex work and fucking enjoy sex work. I like what the Equity Institute has to say in response to the assertion that sex work is exploitative and cannot be a real choice. They say the myth further perpetuates the harmful idea or belief that sex workers are victims without agency or a will of their own.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, Carolyn, from a psychological perspective, why do so many people feel the need to become saviors of the sex workers? I kind of smell the patriarchy here, but tell me more.
Well, I think no matter what side of the street you're on this, you and I tend to take the my body, my choice.
Yes.
And I think that's a pretty safe approach. If you're consenting and you're at what I would consider a mature age and you're not doing this for a means to survive,
yeah.
but also it's your choice. I think so much of this comes from, and this is why I made that sort of soapbox at the beginning, like really think about where your perception lies in this.
Mm-hmm.
So much of how sex work is portrayed in social contracts, literature, and my personal favorite, basically your family system. But when you look at sex work historically, you absolutely smell the patriarchy because it's embedded in religion, specifically colonialistic patriarchy of early religions, including Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the more radical you get, the more, stoning people. I think that was pretty common. Probably still is. Anytime something comes into dominance in that sense, prostitution and sexuality and shame become intertwined. Because why would anyone freely do something out of the bonds of marriage, Jen?
Yeah.
Let alone a woman. But let's not talk about the men who are, we're just here learning them. So let's go back to history again.
You I think Long Island Lolita.
I really am. But I love this. So let's go back to history. So ancient Greece, I'd like to introduce you to the art of honoring sacred sexuality and bliss.
Nice.
I think you're going to know pretty quickly what side of the street I'm on this.
Yeah.
So you to yourself, you to another, and you to the collective 8 billion other people on this entire planet, we all have sex.
Yeah. Well, most of us.
Unless you're an incel, unless you're an involuntary celibate, you hate women or something, But will you at least have a relationship with your body? Hopefully a healthy relationship with your body.
You can have sex with yourself.
That looks like. You absolutely can. So this is something called the sacred prostitute archetype. And I'm a big fan of Jungian archetypes. Jung was... we've heard of Freud. Jung was kind of the other side of Freud. They're actually friends and then they became like kind of rivals. So archetypes guide human behavior. They have a link to things that are kind of generally human wants on a very deep level. Archetypes are made up of beliefs, values, weaknesses, personality traits, motivation, fears. They often have a masculine and a feminine side. So the sacred prostitute archetype is one related to ancient Greek goddesses like Aphrodite, Ishtar, Isis. This practice of sacred prostitution, actually honoring the sacredness of sexuality as a rite performed in the context of religious worship and forms of fertility rites and divine marriage. These were idolized, literally idolized. Awesome. It is awesome. And evidence of the practice of sacred prostitution can be found as far back as descriptions in work of 3rd century historian Herodotus.
I think that's how you say
it. I'm a little tipsy.
We should start looking these things up before we do this. Every night.
So this practice has taken place in civilizations like Egypt, Babylon, Lebanon, Rome. Evidence exists that it took place in Europe as early as the Middle East, right up until Judeo-Christian traditions took
religion
over.
Just messing
God
things
damn
up,
it.
man.
God, golden glory, right?
Yep.
So in ancient religion, Greek goddesses were worshipped in temples, and sexuality was revered in a way that seemed impossible in today's society. Although I think if you go to someplace in San Francisco, you might see that happen.
Yes.
Sacred prostitutes were acted as priestesses of the temple and made their bodies available to strangers as a way of sharing the blessings of the goddesses and the worshipers. So you could actually say that the church was kind of their pimp.
That's cool.
But they were protected. Rather than being considered defiled, they were considered pure and holy.
Nice.
The modern embodiment of the sacred prostitute archetype is someone who uses their sexuality for positive and spiritual purpose as a means of achieving a higher purpose in life. Fuck yeah. Talk about teaching anyone that their body and their sexuality is powerful and authentic. And ladies, you are fucking sitting on a gold mine.
Yeah.
Learn the power of your fucking pussy. I'm sorry.
No, it's very true.
So important.
The patriarchy just beats that out of you. The patriarchy beats us down and tells us to feel shame, yet simultaneously exalts I think some of the more profane.
Yes.
And like, I can't think of the word, but just like, it's such when we talked about this, and I can't remember what episode we talked about it in, but this strange dichotomy that exists here in the United States in particular, where we are simultaneously obsessed with sex and also, no, that's contrary to our religious values as a society.
100%. Well, it even makes me laugh in The Handmaid's Tale, which is just pure despair porn.
Right.
How ironic is it that in the interest of making everything so chaste and pure, but then they have that fucking, basically a brothel.
Well, all the rich men are able to do that,
exactly,
you know?
But that's nothing new. So we outlaw it and say we can't. But then, so anyway, so here's why I talk about this. Not only as, recently within the last year, very happily partnered up monogamously, but being single and having fun, healthy sex that's consensual I'm so glad I got to do that and enjoyed myself and thank God I was okay with everything. But, this is something that I think we don't talk about enough. And I want to talk about sex therapy for a second.
Go for it. That's your job.
Sex therapists, because think about how that works. Legalizing prostitution or legalizing sex work. There are people who work as sex surrogates. Mm-hmm. Have you ever heard of this, Jen?
No.
So this is one of the first movies that I watched where I went, I want to be a sex therapist. Not necessarily to do what this woman did, but so sex therapists, people who view sexuality as a positive means of connecting with someone else on a highly spiritual plane. This is a movie called The Sessions, and it's based on a true story of a sex surrogate, Cheryl Cohen Green, who worked with Berkeley-based poet and journalist Mark O'Brien. She came out of San Francisco and Berkeley.
Hell yeah.
Which is where most sex therapists came out of, originated from our wonderful city.
Yes.
So journalist Mark O'Brien was confined to an iron lug after contracting polio at the age of 6. O'Brien wished to lose his virginity. He contacts a professional sex surrogate played by the stunning Helen Hunt. Yes. And with the help of this therapist and a priest, he gets to experience a sexual awakening.
That's amazing.
Now he had to pay for it.
Yeah.
There were boundaries.
Yep.
There were rules. And so you can actually read An Intimate Life, Sex, Love, and My Journey as a Sex Surrogate Partner, written by Cheryl Cohen Green.
That's fascinating.
But again, and I work with a lot of people on the neurodiverse spectrum.
Yeah.
And when some of these young men and women get to a certain age, it's kind of like, well, are we talking about their bodies and sexuality? Are they going to be able to have a healthy sexual relationship? This would be actually the perfect opportunity to say, yes, absolutely, go pay to have this experience. I don't know. I don't see anything wrong. I don't either.
Or explore it with, your peer who might be in the same situation. We talked about this and the discomfort that so many parents of these kids who are in their early 20s feel around something that's completely normal.
And for some of these kids, it's one of the normalist developmental things that is happening to them is their sexuality. And they're taught, oh no.
And I think it's beautiful too. This has become more of a mainstream conversation is sex amongst folks with physical disabilities. And hey, we want to experience sex too.
Yeah.
And don't
orgasms.
treat us, like we're not human beings with the same basic needs that other human beings have just because we might be in, a wheelchair per se.
Absolutely.
I don't feel comfortable to speak for that community. I'm not a member of that community, but it's what I've observed.
Absolutely.
And I'm like, hell yeah, you deserve to get boned just like everybody else, baby.
I think so. And that's the whole concept behind this, that sexual energy is a source of life, creativity, and is actually capable of bringing greater awareness and connectivity from people people can benefit from that. There's health benefits. The saddest thing that I hear in my office, although I deeply understand this, is when I work with a couple or I work with someone in a relationship and they're not even having sex anymore.
Yeah.
That breaks my fucking heart, because that is such a basis of how your awareness of yourself and how connected you are.
Yeah.
So there's this big assumption being made, back to your question, Jen, that when you seek to be a savior, I don't think the individual, I don't think anyone but the individual themselves can determine if sex work is an act of a damaged soul.
Yeah.
I don't think legal equals healthy. I think if you are only looking at the act of sex, you are missing out on what else is possible in this quote work.
Yeah.
And is camgirling on OnlyFans or stripping in a bar, walking the streets or escorting? I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't say.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty broad blanket statement to say. In best case scenarios, I hope no one regrets anything they do and they're safe.
Right.
But we are not serving anyone by hiding these conversations or hiding these acts. I think there is a way to do it. It's going to happen no matter what. To me, it's like legalizing marijuana. Yeah. It's going to happen anyway you want. Is there a way for the government to sanction this and actually make profit off of it?
Totally.
Cool.
Like they have with weed in California.
They fucking have with weed. Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah. I'm open.
I am too. And I think too, if we talk about San Francisco specifically, this is an incredibly expensive place to live. And my husband and I together make very good money. And at the same time, we're still like, shit, dude, it's a struggle raising a child in the city. And I'm, that I've considered doing OnlyFans. I mean, obscuring my face because of the way I work. And I'm not saying I'm necessarily going to do it, but it's a viable means of bringing in income.
Well, and to always go back to this, but the second rich white women decide that this is exciting, this is nothing that people haven't been doing
exactly.
for fun. And that's the other thing.
Yeah.
This is not new.
Right.
It's called the oldest profession because it is the oldest profession.
Yep.
And, and anything, it's nothing fucking new. So why are we acting like this is the pendulum swings back and forth, right? And, do I think it's healthy for people to having sex with sex bots? I don't know.
Yeah. That's a new frontier, man.
But I think you're not, these are also, I think, basic human needs, both for the person. I think we're not often looking at it with such a skewed lens. Yeah. And I love that idea of the sex surrogate and sex therapist and things like that, because you are then saying, well, then I'm a sex worker. Yeah. I'm not a sex surrogate.
Right.
But I think I'd be fucking good at that.
You'd be great at it. For sure. So we're going to wrap this up by saying, we understand there's a lot to discuss when it comes to this topic. Yeah. We're big fans, as you can probably tell, of the notion that multiple things can be true simultaneously. Yeah. Do we acknowledge that many people who go into sex work do so because of trauma and lack of economic opportunity? Of course we fucking do. Do we also acknowledge that when it comes to women, particularly women of color and trans women, that it's our inequitable society that creates a need to engage in survival sex work in the first place? Yes. Can we acknowledge that plenty of people go into sex work willingly, enjoy it, and should enjoy the right to feel safe at work the same way that I do when I walk into my government office every day? You bet. So look, what we've done with legal marijuana, as we mentioned, we can, in California, we could do that with sex work. I'm confident. Well, not a perfect system. I no longer have to meet shady dudes on a dark street to obtain my weed anymore, right? Chester showing up on his fucking motorcycle in the sunset at 10 o'clock at night.
We weren't doing that at 16.
No, I can walk into a clean dispensary. I can speak with someone knowledgeable about my weed needs and know that my bud tender is making a decent wage and may even be getting benefits. Mind blown. At the end of the day, our primary concern in any profession is that people feel safe and have viable economic options. And we firmly believe that by decriminalizing or legalizing sex work, that we can achieve a level of safety that sex workers in this country have yet to see. That's it.
Cool.
All right, everybody.
It's a wrap.
We hope you enjoyed it.
Cool.
All right. Goodbye. Yeah, go get some, no matter how you get some. But be respectful, goddammit. All right, everybody, have a good night. We'll see you next week. Like, subscribe, give us a good rating. Woo! Bye.
Bye.
All right. Oh, fucking A.